I can work, Maya's tiny fist drummed against the dented metal lunchbox, her voice a mixture of trembling and defiance. From across the bustling cafeteria, Marcus Thorne came to a sudden halt. In his entire life, no one had ever addressed him with such raw nerve, especially not a child who barely reached his waist. With unsteady hands, she unlatched the box, revealing not a sandwich or an apple, but a single crumpled piece of notebook paper. Mija, I'm so sorry. No food today. I will do better tomorrow. Te amo, mama. The man who had conquered markets and built financial empires felt an unfamiliar tightness in his throat, a sudden suffocating realization that the hunger seated before him was, in some distant and abstract way, a consequence of his own actions. Marcus Thorne had spent the better part of his 42 years observing the world through the safety of armored glass and from the vantage point of polished boardroom tables. The billionaire investor was a legend in financial circles, celebrated for his razor-sharp intuition, his relentless ambition, and a cultivated taste for a level of luxury most people could only witness in magazines. Yet, for all the opulence that insulated him, the penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, the art collection in his Lincoln Park brownstone, the private jet waiting at a discreet airfield, he was shadowed by a quiet, persistent hollowness he could never articulate. Victories were frequent, profits soared, but the satisfaction of each success evaporated as quickly as the ink on the contracts. It was on a crisp Thursday afternoon in Chicago, as his town car navigated a detour through the vibrant streets of Pilsen, that his meticulously planned schedule was interrupted. He hadn't intended to stop. Deviations were anathema to his structured life, but the sight of children's brightly colored jackets swarming in a schoolyard pulled at him with an unexpected gravity. He instructed his driver to park a block away, loosened the knot of his silk tie, and walked toward the school's wrought iron gates, carrying only an envelope containing a donation he had meant to mail. The school's interior smelled of chalk dust, floor wax, and the faint, comforting aroma of baked bread wafting from the cafeteria. Teachers offered friendly nods as students rushed through the hallways, their chatter echoing off the lockers. Marcus, in his bespoke suit and gleaming leather shoes, felt conspicuously out of place, an intruder from another world. He pressed on, assuring himself this was merely a brief philanthropic detour. After a short meeting with the school secretary, he left the envelope on her cluttered desk and politely declined any form of acknowledgement. On his way out, he was drawn by the cacophony of lunchtime. He paused at the entrance to the cafeteria, a cavernous room filled with rows of long, scarred wooden tables. Some children were eagerly unpacking vibrant lunchboxes, while others balanced trays piled high with food from the school's lunch line. The room was a symphony of noise, mess, and unbridled energy. It was then that his eyes landed on a solitary figure in a far corner, a little girl, no older than 7. With 2 thick, dark braids that fell over her shoulders, she sat before a faded, dented lunchbox that seemed to hold no weight at all. Instead of eating, she was engaged in a meticulous pantomime, arranging invisible utensils, pouring imaginary tea, and murmuring softly as if she were the host of an elegant dinner party. Marcus froze. The scene was a collision of heartbreaking innocence and devastating reality. He moved closer, the soft click of his dress shoes against the linoleum floor barely audible over the din. The girl looked up, her initial surprise melting into a smile so radiant it momentarily disarmed him. "Welcome, sir," she said, with grave seriousness, her small hands folded primly on the table. "Are you looking for a table?" He found himself sitting awkwardly on the low bench across from her, his knees nearly touching his chest. "If you have one available," he replied, deciding to play along. Her dark eyes sparkled. "Of course. The special today is magic soup, and for dessert, we have a cloud cake." With a theatrical flourish, she opened the lunchbox. For a split second, he anticipated seeing nothing but the worn metal bottom. Instead, his gaze caught a glimpse of folded paper tucked inside before she snapped the lid shut again. He had seen the careful, looping handwriting. "I'm so sorry. No food today." And below it, a simple, gut-wrenching sign-off. "Te amo, mama." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had reviewed financial reports that eviscerated companies, signed contracts that shifted fortunes. But nothing in his 42 years had ever pierced him so deeply as that single, desperate sentence. The child, sensing his attention had lingered too long on the box, resumed her charade, stirring the air with an invisible spoon. Marcus forced a smile, lifting an imaginary utensil to his lips. "This soup is incredible," he managed to say, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. The girl's smile widened. "It's my secret recipe. I only make it for very special guests." He nodded, pretending to chew on nothing, but deep inside his chest, a tectonic plate shifted. He had dedicated his life to the pursuit of significance through profit margins and market conquests. Yet here, across from a child armed with only a dented lunchbox and an imagination powerful enough to mask her hunger, he encountered a profound truth that had always eluded him. The world around them seemed to fade. The clatter of trays and the chorus of children's voices dissolved into a distant hum. He saw only her small hands, gracefully serving a meal that didn't exist. Her innocence wasn't a shield from reality, it was a tool for surviving it. And in that moment, the billionaire, who believed he possessed everything, felt his eyes begin to burn. He blinked hard, swallowing against a wave of feeling he hadn't anticipated and was utterly unprepared for. "Do you have your restaurant here every day?" he asked softly. "Yes," she answered with pride, "except on days when the rain is too loud. Then my kitchen is closed." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "But it will be open again tomorrow. Will you come back?" Marcus hesitated. He was a man of contracts and binding agreements, not casual promises to children. But something in her hopeful gaze left him with no alternative. "Yes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll come back." The shrill ring of a bell signaled the end of the lunch period. She closed her empty lunchbox with practiced care and carried it away as if it were laden with treasure. Marcus remained seated for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the empty space she had occupied, haunted by the image of that folded, apologetic note. For the first time in decades, the man who measured his existence in billions of dollars walked back to his car feeling utterly impoverished. And he knew, with a certainty that both terrified and compelled him, that the promise he had just made was one he had every intention of keeping. The following morning, Marcus Thorne walked through the school's iron gates, carrying a simple paper bag. He had canceled his first 2 meetings, an act that had sent ripples of confusion through his executive staff. Instead, he had gone himself to a small shop on Michigan Avenue and selected a new lunchbox, one decorated with a cheerful pattern of monarch butterflies. Inside, he had carefully packed a warm container of macaroni and cheese, a crisp apple, some carrot sticks, and a small chocolate bar wrapped in gold foil. He had told his driver not to wait for him. This was no longer a quick stop. It was a mission he needed to complete with his own 2 hands. Upon entering the cafeteria, his eyes immediately scanned the room for Maya Alvarez. She was at the same corner table, the old dented box sitting before her as if she were preparing for another day of imaginary service. When she spotted him, her expression transformed from surprise to pure delight, and she waved him over as if greeting her most cherished regular. "I saved you a seat," she announced grandly. Marcus smiled and placed the paper bag on the table. He opened it slowly, retrieved the butterfly lunchbox, and set it in front of her. "I thought perhaps your restaurant was due for an upgrade," he said gently. Her eyes grew wide as she touched the smooth new surface with a sense of reverence. She unlatched it carefully, and when she saw the real food nestled inside, her mouth fell open in a silent gasp. "Is this for me?" "For you," Marcus confirmed with a nod, "but only on the condition that you share it with your customers." She let out a laugh, a sound so genuine and bright it seemed to illuminate the entire room. Without a moment's hesitation, she began dividing the apple into small slices and scooping portions of macaroni onto napkins, calling out to a few classmates who were watching with curiosity. "We have a new special today," she declared, her voice filled with pride. A small group of children gathered around, giggling as Maya handed them pieces of apple and small bites of her lunch. She gave away more than half of it before finally taking a bite for herself. Marcus sat back, a silent observer, as the children around her cheered. Maya's restaurant had become real, not just because of the food, but because of the infectious joy she radiated. He understood then that he hadn't just brought her a meal. He had brought her dignity, the ability to participate without shame. When the other children had returned to their own tables, Maya leaned toward him, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "My mama says I shouldn't take things from strangers," she admitted. "But you don't feel like a stranger." Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his throat. He kept his voice even and soft. "Your mama sounds like a very smart woman." "She is," Maya said quickly. "She used to work at a big factory on the south side. She made coats. She worked really hard. But then some men in suits said they didn't need her anymore. She cries sometimes, but she always tells me everything will be okay." Maya looked down at the butterfly lunchbox, her small fingers tracing the outline of a wing. "That's why I had to pretend yesterday. I didn't want anyone to feel sorry for me." Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. The south side, the garment factory. He knew it well. It was a subsidiary of Thorne Holdings, a textile company he had acquired several years prior. His mind flashed back to quarterly reports, restructuring proposals, and layoff mandates. The name Alvarez had never crossed his desk, of course, but the cold, calculated decision that had shattered her family's stability had been approved with his signature. For a dizzying moment, he wanted to dismiss it as a coincidence, to push the thought away, but Maya's gaze was fixed on him with a simple, profound trust that left no room for denial. He nodded slowly, the weight of his complicity settling upon him. "Your mom must be very strong," he said, the words feeling hollow. Maya beamed. "She's the strongest. She tells me to keep drawing and to never stop smiling. She says, 'Tomorrow always comes, mija.'" From her backpack, she produced a folded piece of paper and handed it to him. It was a drawing, rendered in bright, hopeful crayon. It depicted 3 figures sitting around a dinner table: a woman with long, dark hair, a little girl with braids, and a tall black man in a suit. "This is me and Mama," he explained, pointing to the first 2 figures. Then she tapped the man in the suit. "And that's you. You came to our house for dinner." Marcus stared at the drawing, the simple lines and bold colors conveying a world of innocent hope. Something inside him that had been calcified for years began to crack. He had spent his career building walls, insulating himself from the human consequences of his business decisions. Numbers and projections had always been his shield. But here, in a child's drawing, he was not a distant executive. He was a guest. He was family. "Do you want me to keep this?" he asked, his voice strained. "Yes," Maya said firmly. "Because if you keep it, you have to come back. If you don't, the picture won't be true." He folded the paper with meticulous care and slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket. "Then I will come back," he promised. The bell rang again, and Maya packed up her new lunchbox, clutching it to her chest like a precious jewel. Marcus walked her to her classroom door. Other parents were in the hallway, waiting to pick up their children, but Maya walked by herself. Just before disappearing into the classroom, she turned back to him. "Don't forget," she said, her tone serious. Marcus left the school with the drawing feeling warm against his chest. He had come here intending to bestow a small gift, a simple act of charity. Instead, he was leaving with a responsibility he could no longer ignore. The echo of her words, "That's you. You came to our house for dinner," followed him all the way back to his waiting car. As the driver held the door open, Marcus paused. For the first time in a very long time, his next move had nothing to do with profit or prestige. It had everything to do with a little girl who drew pictures of a better tomorrow and who had trusted him to be a part of it. Marcus Thorne had never walked the streets of Pilsen with a sense of dread before. He had driven through the neighborhood on his way to other destinations, observing the vibrant murals and bustling storefronts from behind the tinted glass of his town car. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't an observer. He was following a 7-year-old girl to a small apartment tucked above a shuttered bakery, the weight of her crayon drawing in his pocket, feeling heavier with every step. The stairwell was narrow and smelled of damp concrete and the ghost of freshly baked bread. Maya climbed the steps with practiced ease, her butterfly lunchbox bumping against her leg. Marcus followed more slowly, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing in the enclosed space. She stopped at a door with peeling green paint, pressed her ear against the wood for a moment, and then turned the knob. "Mama," she called out softly. "I'm home." The apartment was scarcely larger than the walk-in closet in Marcus's penthouse. A narrow bed occupied one corner, a thin blanket folded neatly across it. A hot plate sat on a small counter next to a stained sink. The only light filtered in through a single window, its curtain, faded and patched. On a small, wobbly table lay a stack of unopened envelopes, their bold red lettering screaming overdue warnings. Maya set her lunchbox down with care and rushed to the woman lying on the bed. Elena Alvarez was likely in her mid-30s, but illness and exhaustion had etched deep lines around her eyes. She turned her head slowly, revealing sharp cheekbones and a mouth set in a line of grim determination. Even in her apparent frailty, she possessed a quiet strength that demanded respect. "This is Mr. Thorne," Maya announced with the formality of a royal introduction. "He's the one who gave me the new lunchbox." Elena pushed herself into a sitting position, her movements slow and deliberate, betraying a weariness she tried to conceal. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "I don't know what to say. My daughter doesn't usually bring strangers home." Marcus inclined his head, feeling like a colossal intruder in this intimate space where every object told a story of struggle and survival. "Your daughter is remarkable," he said finally. "She has a way of making the world a little brighter." A faint smile touched Elena's lips. "She has carried more than a child ever should, but she is the reason we are both still standing." Her gaze shifted to Maya, who was now laying out her drawing supplies on the floor, completely absorbed in her own world. Marcus hesitated, searching for the right words. "Maya told me you used to work in the garment district, at the factory on the south side." For a fleeting moment, a complex emotion, a mix of pain and pride, flickered in Elena's eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "I worked there for 11 years. My mother worked there before me. We thought it was for life. But then the new owners came. The managers said costs were too high. One day they called us all into the break room and read names from a list. My name was on it." Her words were delivered without self-pity, but Marcus heard the profound loss beneath them. He knew that list. He had authorized the directive that created it. He remembered the meeting in New York, the consultants with their charts and graphs, the cold logic that made the cuts seem not only necessary but prudent. To him, it had been a line item on a spreadsheet. To her, it had been the complete unraveling of a life. "I'm sorry," he murmured, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Elena gave a short, humorless laugh. "Sorry doesn't pay the rent, Mr. Thorne. Sorry doesn't keep the heat on, but I'm not asking for your pity. I found other work when I could, cleaning offices at night, mending clothes for neighbors. It was never enough, but it was something. Then I got sick. And, well, Maya learned to do more for herself. That's the hardest part. Watching your child carry burdens she shouldn't even know exist." Marcus felt the air in the small room grow thick. His gaze fell upon the butterfly, lunchbox Maya had placed on the table. Its bright, cheerful colors seemed almost defiant in the dim apartment, a small beacon of hope in a sea of hardship. He realized then that the simple gift he had brought was freighted with a meaning he had never intended. "Why didn't you ask for help?" he asked, his voice low. Elena's posture straightened slightly. "Because help always has strings attached. Because people look at you differently when they know you can't stand on your own 2 feet. I wanted Maya to believe her mother was strong, not broken." Marcus swallowed hard. He thought of the charity galas he attended, the enormous checks he signed over cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. He had always told himself he was doing good. But here, in this cramped apartment, he was confronted with the human face of the statistics he had so easily dismissed. He saw the true cost of his efficiency etched in the hollows of Elena's cheeks and reflected in the quiet courage of her daughter. Maya broke the tense silence, rushing over to him with a new drawing. This one depicted a small house with 3 figures standing in front of it. "That's Mama, that's me, and that's you," she said, pointing to each figure in turn. "See? We're all together now." Elena looked from the drawing to Marcus, her eyes narrowing with a protective suspicion. "You've known her for 2 days, and she's already drawn you into our family. Children don't see the world the way we do. They believe what they feel, not what they calculate. Marcus met her gaze directly. Maybe that's what we've forgotten how to do. Maybe children are right more often than we are. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of all that was unsaid hung between them. Marcus desperately wanted to tell her the truth, that he was not just some wealthy stranger who had stumbled into their lives. He wanted to confess that the order that had cost her her job had his name on it. But the words wouldn't come. Would telling her now shatter the fragile trust that was just beginning to form? He looked at Maya, who was humming to herself as she colored the roof of the little house red. The purity of her focus solidified his resolve. He couldn't change the past, but he was the only one who could define what happened next. I don't want to be another person who disappears, he said at last. I want to help, not as charity, but as a commitment. Your daughter deserves more than empty promises and imaginary meals. Elena studied him, her expression a battle between pride and necessity. Finally, she gave a single sharp nod, though her voice remained firm. Help her first. If you can do that, then we will see about the rest. That evening, as Marcus left the small apartment, the Chicago air felt different. The city's beauty for him had always been in its towering skyline, its world-class museums, its sheer scale of power and wealth. But now, its meaning was tied to a tired apartment above a bakery, to a mother fighting for her dignity, and to a little girl who believed that a lunchbox decorated with butterflies could hold a feast. He walked into the night with Maya's drawing folded in his pocket, and the heavy knowledge that the cost of his decisions had a name, a face, and a family he could no longer afford to ignore. The following week, Marcus Thorne strode into the marble and glass lobby of his company's headquarters in New York City, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the markets. His board of directors was waiting for him in the penthouse conference room, prepared to discuss quarterly earnings and potential acquisitions. But Marcus's mind was 2,000 miles away, in a small Chicago apartment, replaying the image of unpaid bills on a wobbly table and the look in Elena Alvarez's eyes as she spoke of her lost job. Those images had become more tangible to him than the balance sheets spread across his desk. The boardroom was an expanse of polished chrome and dark wood, with a panoramic view of the city. The men and women seated around the table, all dressed in immaculate suits, rose as he entered. For years, Marcus had orchestrated these meetings with surgical precision, his words chosen for maximum impact and efficiency. Today, however, his voice held a different quality. We need to revisit the layoffs at the Chicago Textile Division, he began, dispensing with any preamble. A low murmur rippled through the room. One director, a man named Henderson, leaned forward, his tone sharp. Marcus, that decision saved the division. It was underperforming. Reversing course now would be financially irresponsible. Marcus's gaze was unwavering. It may have saved money, but it cost people their livelihoods. People who dedicated years of their lives to that company were discarded like obsolete inventory. I signed that order, and I am here to correct it. Another director, a woman with a reputation for ruthless pragmatism, shook her head. This isn't personal, Marcus. It was a business decision. If we start relitigating every tough choice based on sentiment, we'll lose all credibility with our shareholders. The Marcus of a month ago would have agreed, but the crayon drawing in his pocket felt like a hot coal against his chest. He leaned forward, placing his palms flat on the cool glass table. That's the entire problem. It is personal, and we've pretended it isn't for far too long. We hide behind spreadsheets and projections and forget that those numbers represent families, children, and futures. If we have a credibility problem, it's because we've forgotten our own humanity. The room fell into a stunned silence. No one had ever heard him speak like this. They were accustomed to his cold logic, not this impassioned appeal to morality. He was pushing against the very culture of cutthroat efficiency he himself had cultivated. He pressed his advantage. I want Elena Alvarez reinstated immediately, with full back pay and compensation for what she's lost. Furthermore, I want a complete review of every layoff from that facility. We will prioritize rehiring wherever possible. The directors exchanged nervous glances. Henderson finally spoke, his voice cautious. You're asking us to set a new precedent. The market will see it as weakness. What do we tell our investors? Marcus answered without a flicker of hesitation. Tell them we are investing in people. Tell them we refuse to build our profits on the ruins of other people's dignity. And if they don't understand that, then they aren't the kind of investors we want. The words hung in the air, startling even himself with their conviction. For the first time in his professional life, he wasn't thinking about stock prices or quarterly growth. He was thinking about a 7-year-old girl opening a lunchbox to find only an apology from her mother. The board argued for hours, citing risks, fiduciary duties, and the danger of shareholder revolts. Marcus listened patiently, but his resolve was iron. By the end of the day, the first steps were in motion. Elena would be offered a new position in management at the Chicago factory, a role that acknowledged her experience and loyalty. And more significantly, Marcus had planted the seed of a profound cultural shift within the entire corporation. That night, he flew back to Chicago and drove to Pilsen himself to deliver the news. Elena opened the door, her expression wary. Maya, however, ran forward, her butterfly lunchbox swinging at her side, her face breaking into a huge smile when she saw him. "You came back," she cried, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Marcus knelt to meet her gaze. "I made a promise, didn't I?" He then stood and turned to Elena. "I've spoken with my board. Your job is waiting for you, but it's more than that. We're creating new policies to ensure what happened to you and your colleagues never happens again." Elena's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. "Why are you doing this? Is it guilt? Charity?" Marcus shook his head. "It's responsibility, and it's respect. You deserved better from us. We failed you. This isn't about pity. It's about making things right." For a long moment, she said nothing, simply studying his face with her weary, intelligent eyes. Then she gave a slow nod, a hint of her fierce pride still present in her voice. "I don't want any favors. I will earn my place." "You already did," Marcus said softly. "It's our turn to honor that." In the weeks that followed, Marcus's transformation deepened. He established a foundation and launched a pilot program called the Lunchbox Initiative, ensuring every student in Maya's school district received a free, nutritious meal each day. What began with a single act of kindness for one child evolved into a citywide mission, with other corporations taking notice. Newspapers began writing about the billionaire who had seemingly undergone a profound change, the ruthless financier who is now speaking publicly about corporate responsibility and community care. At the school cafeteria, Maya no longer sat by herself. She had become the program's unofficial ambassador, proudly helping to hand out trays to her friends. Marcus visited often, not as a wealthy benefactor making a grand display, but as a man quietly learning how to be present. One afternoon, she presented him with a new drawing. This one showed a long table crowded with smiling children, all eating together. She had drawn herself at one end, her mother beside her, and Marcus at the other, a broad smile on his face. "Now everyone gets a real restaurant," she explained. Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling more satisfying than any financial victory. It wasn't pride, it was a sense of belonging. His board continued to grumble, and some investors remained skeptical, but Marcus no longer cared in the same way. He had seen what true wealth looked like, not in a ledger, but in the bright, trusting eyes of a child who knew that tomorrow would bring a meal, not an apology. One evening, as he was leaving the factory after a long day of meetings, a group of workers stopped him to shake his hand. Their expressions varied from cautious optimism to genuine gratitude, but they all recognized that a fundamental shift had occurred. He was no longer a distant figure in an ivory tower. He was there, on the ground, sharing the responsibility they had carried all along. And when he returned to the small apartment above the bakery, Elena met him at the door, her posture straighter, her eyes clearer. "You've changed more than just my life," she told him, her voice steady. "You've changed my daughter's future." Marcus nodded, humbled. "She changed mine first." It was the simple truth he now carried everywhere. Not the market numbers, not the headlines, but the indelible memory of an empty lunchbox and the promise he had made to fill it. Not just for one child, but for as many as he could reach.